This afternoon, we have Gordon Howard, who is the Community Services Division Manager.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Hillary. I'm here as the manager in charge of this rulemaking and from the management perspective.
Right. And also on the call this afternoon, we have Alexis Hammer.
Hey, folks. Good to see you all. My name is Alexis Hammer. I'm the Legislative and Policy Manager at DLCD.
And we also have our commission liaison for this project, Barbara Boyer.
Am I just introducing myself right now, Hillary?
Yeah,
okay.
And we'll end off with the charge before we go into the conversation.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm Barbara Boyer. I joined the commission in January of 2022. I am a farmer in rural Yamhill County.
We're super glad to have Commissioner Boyer as our liaison for this project. Thank you for being here as well, Commissioner. All right, so now we're going to go through introductions of the RAC membership alphabetically by first name. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself and briefly state why you are looking forward to participating on this RAC, and maybe a few words on what a successful meeting looks like to you. So going alphabetically, we'll start with Alyssa Bowles.
Hey everybody, I am Alyssa Bowles. I'm the planning manager for Linn County. I'm looking forward to serving on this RAC as a person who daily implements these provisions. So this is some much needed guidance and clarification for us at the local level. And I think a successful meeting for me looks like active participation, active discussion. Yep.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. And Amber, next.
Hi, I am Amber Bell. I am the planning director with Linn County, and a successful meeting for me looks like hearing everyone's perspectives.
Right, and maybe why you're excited to be participating in this particular conversation.
Apologies, I was having a slight technical difficulty when you asked that question. I look forward to participating in this particular conversation because here at Linn County, of course, we implement the rules directly, and we're always looking to grow our understanding of the rules, but are particularly excited to be a part of this process to be able to participate in the rulemaking as well.
Great. Thank you, Amber. And then from Marion County, Austin.
Yeah, hi guys. Austin Barnes with Marion County. I'm the principal planner here at Marion County. Excited about this one because some of the cases we're going to talk about today are out of Marion County. I've worked on some of the LUBA cases, and I'm sure I will continue to work on LUBA cases in regards to farm and forest with Marion County. And I think a good meeting is one where everyone's heard, everyone can get some thoughts out, and we gain other understandings from other people that will help us all make better rules to work with. Thanks, guys.
All right, great. Thank you, Austin. And Blair.
Hi, I'm Blair Batson. I'm a staff attorney with 1000 Friends of Oregon. And I'm excited about being on this RAC because this is work that's been needed to be done for a long, long time. And I'm thrilled that we're finally going to update and hopefully clarify some of the rules that we've all been working with for years. And I think a good meeting, I think other people have said it, it's that everybody gets to give their point of view in a clear way that Hillary can hopefully compile into great recommendations for the agency.
Thank you, Blair. And from Jackson, Charles Bennett.
Hi there, Charles Bennett, the planner, comprehensive planner, senior here. Very excited, been working for Jackson County for 20 years and love the farm and forest resources, and would like to see them continue on. And this is, I think this is a great opportunity to clarify those rules. Jackson County comes up in a lot of LUBA cases regarding this stuff, and would not like to have to do that so much. So looking forward to getting some clarification on these different topics. And a successful committee is it's great. It looks like we have a wide range of folks here, and hopefully we'll be able to get some consensus and move this forward. So thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Charles. And next we have Jim Johnson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Johnson. I'm the Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Historically, I was Hillary once in my lifetime. I was at DLCD as the Farm Forest Coordinator, actually probably the first Farm Forest Coordinator. There was farm people and forest, but not the combination like there is now. And so it's exciting for me to see this development. I've worked with many of you over the years, some only on the phone. So it's kind of nice to get connected through this type of meeting and such. I'm excited about this because there's a lot of us that, I was a county planner once also that have implemented a lot of these things, but then get connected in the policy side. And it's exciting for me to work with a lot of people that have actually worked the zoning counter, because a lot of times policy doesn't take into account well how zoning works in the real world. So that's really exciting to me. And it's been said before, a good meeting is one where everybody's involved and everybody's respected, and I'm looking forward to that happening here. So thanks, Hillary, for inviting me to participate in this meeting.
We are happy to have you, Jim. And Jim is one of two people on this Rules Advisory Committee who used to have my position, which will make it an even more exciting conversation. All right, and we also have with us Jan Lee.
Hi, I'm president of the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts and also a member of the Oregon Water Resources Commission and a planning commissioner from the city of Sandy. Formerly, I was on the Clackamas County Commission, so I understand some of the issues that the planners have to work with. And I really hope that the work of this RAC will end up making pathways clearer for all of us. And I look forward to working with this diverse group of members to reach our goal. Thank you, Hillary.
All right, thank you so much, Jan. And we also have Jeffrey Kleinman as part of our Rules Advisory Group.
Hi, Hillary. I'm Jeff Kleinman. I'm an attorney in longtime private practice in Portland. I represented the petitioners in Stop the Dump and in a couple of the Friends of the Anvil County cases. I think the rules do need updating and clarification to reflect rulings in those cases, which is one of the things that we're working on today. And I agree with Jim Johnson's comments about what constitutes a good meeting.
Right. Thank you. We're excited to have you here. And Joy, are you on today? I wasn't sure if Joy was going to be able to make it.
Joy is still out till Wednesday.
Okay. Yeah. And Justin Green.
Good afternoon. I'm Justin Green with Justin B. Green Consulting. For the last few years, I've been running my own consulting practice, but prior to that, spent over a decade running the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act programs in Florida and Oregon. I also have a legal background. I look forward to this work and just playing a part in providing clarification and guidance on how this program is implemented for quality and consistency across the state. And successful meetings to me are always ones that have active participation and good focused conversation. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Justin. And we also have with us today, Catherine Daniels. Oh, Catherine, you're on mute.
There we go. I'm Catherine Daniels, retired in the former position of Hillary, Farm and Forest Land Specialist for 8 years. And also I worked for the department early in the program and worked on some of the original comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances. I see this as a window of opportunity to make some important updates to some key uses and issues in the farm zone. and long overdue for attention. And I think a successful meeting involves coming up with some good clarity and guidance on these issues looking ahead.
Right. Thank you, Catherine, and for taking some time out of retirement too. And we have Kenneth Katzeroff as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Katzeroff. I'm an attorney, and I do a lot of work in Central Oregon, but other places around the state as well. I'm looking forward to this in a kind of an applicant's perspective of how we are trying to use these rules to come into compliance with certain projects, and have some real interest and some clarity also. I also think I'm one of the few folks, it looks like, who does a lot of work in central and the eastern side of the state. And so some of the rules don't always mesh completely the same as in the valley. So I think that's something that I'm going to be putting my attention to. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Glad to have you here. And we also have Lauren Poor from the Farm Bureau.
Hi, everyone. I am Lauren Poor from the Oregon Farm Bureau. I'm excited to participate in this discussion because obviously any decisions made here will have a direct impact on OFB's members. And then as far as a productive meeting, everything everyone said, but I think the other thing is seeing all of the feedback and input then incorporated into the rules on the back end is always really helpful too. So we know that we're actually participating in the production of the work product in the end.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And Maitri.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maitri Sinha. I'm the Senior Rural Planner with Washington County Development Services, and I'm happy to be here today. So we implement these rules on a regular basis, and it's great to be part of this committee where we're trying to establish some consistency and clarity for everybody with these regulations. And I feel like a really good meeting is where we're all contributing and identifying the issues and identifying also a path forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maitri. It's great to have you here. And from Umatilla, Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Dobchevsky, Umatilla County Planning Manager. I'm excited to serve on this RAC as someone who implements these rules on a daily basis. And I'm looking forward to getting some clarification on how we should be implementing the farm forest rules. To me, a successful meeting is one with active participation and one where everyone's given the opportunity to share their thoughts.
Okay, thank you for being here, Megan. And Mike.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy, McCarthy Family Farm. Been farming for 43 years now, full-time, make all my living farming. Farmed some in Douglas County, some in Hood River County, in past years in Douglas County, in Hood River County now. Have kids that want to farm and are running my farm, very much want an opportunity for people to have farmland to farm on in the future. That's critical to me. I just hope we have a good conversation and try to realize the intent of the Oregon land use system in these meetings.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for being here today and participating. And Mickey, hopefully she was able to attend today.
Yep, I'm on.
All right, great.
I had to leave, as I told you before, if sheep are lambing, I'm lambing.
Yeah.
I'm a shepherd. I live in Central Oregon, have farmed on this location since '78. I grew up in Halfway. I still have the family farm in Halfway that is farmed also in Eastern Oregon. I got involved because I used to think Goal 3 protected us, agriculture and farmers, and slowly it's been weakened in my opinion. And I want to be active and involved and let everybody know from a farmer's perspective what the challenges are to those of us who farm and raise livestock and grow crops. A successful outcome to me is clarifying the rules, having consistency, and making sure everybody's voice is heard and respected. and plenty of luck to Hillary on managing the meeting.
Thank you, Mickey, and thank you for being here. I'm glad it worked with the schedule. And Nellie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nellie McAdams, and I'm with Oregon Agricultural Trust. In the background, you will hear my newborn, Walter. So I'm going to be off a screen for the most part of the meetings here while I'm taking care of him as well. At OAT, or Oregon Agricultural Trust, we help farmers and ranchers around the state sell off development rights that they wouldn't need anyways if they were keeping the land in production. And that's not only fragmentation or building of homes, but any of the non-farm uses that are allowed in agriculture. So I think for us, it'd be great to have some clarity there. And a productive meeting is one where I think Hillary and DLCD get the information that they need and are able to operationalize it based on the input. So thank you for leading the process.
All right, thank you, and thank you for participating with the boys as well in the background. And we also have Rob Halliburton as part of our Rules Advisory Committee today.
Hi, I'm representing Friends of Yamhill County today, and I'm involved in this because I'd like to see it made easier for counties to make good decisions. And I think a successful meeting, in addition to what other folks have said, would be consensus advice to the department on what the rule amendments should say.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you for being here. And we have Rory Isbell.
Yeah, hi, Hillary. Hi, everyone else. I'm Rory Isbell. I am the Rural Lands Program Director and a staff attorney with Central Oregon Land Watch based in Bend. I'm excited for this rulemaking because Central Oregon Land Watch has been working to preserve our region's farm and forest lands for going on 4 decades now. And after many decades of a lot of these rules getting a lot of legal interpretation through the case law, I'm excited to kind of, go back the other way and go back to the rules and see what sort of updates they need. Similar to like many of you have already voiced, I'm really excited to see the perspectives from folks across the state that work with these rules kind of coalesce on how these rules should be amended to work and provide conformity for everyone across the state. Thanks.
Very great. Thank you for being here, Rory. And then Samantha Bear is also on the Rules Advisory Committee, but I wasn't quite sure if she was going to make it today or not. Samantha, are you on?
I am. Hi, everyone.
Okay,
I'm
great.
Samantha Baird, General Counsel for the Oregon Property Owners Association. We represent the rights of Oregon's private property owners, including farmers and ranchers across the state. I'm really looking forward to being part of this RAC. Similarly to Ken, we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of the applicant mostly. We represent not only farmers and ranchers, but those who are going to be applying for non-farm uses in the farm zone. And many of those applicants are actually going to be farmers themselves. So just really looking forward to being here. I think in my perspective, what makes a good meeting is that we meet the charge of the rulemaking and the meeting ends on time. Thank you.
We'll try to meet that goal. All right. Thank you, Samantha. I'm glad you could be here. And last but certainly not least, Tyler Ernst. Is Tyler not with us, Casaria? Okay. So we'll follow up. But Tyler Ernst with the Oregon Forest Industries Council is also a member of this Rules Advisory Committee. So I heard from a lot of folks agreement, which is in line with the charge and the charter for this Rulemaking Advisory Committee, that there's a desire to improve clarity of the rules and a desire to be heard, that all members on the Rules Advisory Committee can have their voices heard, their perspectives considered. So I really do appreciate, as you will notice from the introductions, that we have a good group right here representing a variety of different perspectives. And I just wanted to reiterate that you were all selected to participate because we do want to hear from you. Your feedback is important to us, and we think that you offer a unique perspective on our rules that will really be helpful in considering how we move forward with this project. So if something occurs to you after the meeting, or you regret maybe not speaking up about something, or if we run out of time during the meeting because we're ending on time, we do still want to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to forward your thoughts to me directly. The point of this process is to gather feedback. And I do want to reiterate that while it would be fantastic if we end up coming to an agreement about language, we don't necessarily have to. If we don't come to an agreement and there are sort of alternative perspectives, those alternative perspectives will be noted in our report to LCDC. And you will all also have the right as a member of the public to participate in the LCDC hearings in September and December if you want to, whether you support staff's recommendations or you would prefer to see something else. All right. So I did just want to touch quickly on our schedule before we hear from Commissioner Boyer. So we are going to be meeting monthly throughout July. In July, we will ask you to review and comment on the fiscal impact statement and the racial equity impact statement. But all of our other meetings, we're going to be talking about rule language. And again, staff will consider all of your suggestions that we're collecting throughout the process. We will take those suggestions and we will develop a draft rule proposal that will be published in August along with the notice of proposed rulemaking. LCDC will have their rulemaking hearing in September, at which point there's an opportunity for additional public comment. And the adoption hearing is going to be in early December. So just a little orientation to the schedule one last time for what we're going to be doing together over the next couple of months. So now I would like to invite Commissioner Boyer to orient us to the charge from the commission. So, and I do want to note, just to follow on to Samantha's comment that, ideas may come up during this process that are outside of the scope of the charge that we've received from our commission. When that happens, those will be noted. We'll take note of those. And some of those items might be considered in the broader work plan project that's going on for future actions. But Commissioner Boyer, would you like to say a few words?
All right. Thank you, Hillary. So I just really wanted, on behalf of the commission, I just wanted to thank you all for your time and attention to this RAC. This RAC came out of a technical working group that was late summer, early fall last year. And this technical working group identified over 70 areas of the farm and forest reports. They just identified more clarity in the rules. And I was hearing that in the technical working group that it's really important to get back to the original intent of some of this legislation. So that was really much the motivation of the commission for forming this RAC. And I look forward to learning from you all. And Hillary has set the pace and the expectations for this charge from the commission. And I just wanted to thank Hillary very much for leading this. And I will be off camera I will not be participating. I will be listening and reporting back to the commission about the what's happening in the RAC meetings. So thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you so very much, Commissioner Boyer. We're very excited to have Commissioner Boyer as our LCDC liaison for this project. So again, thank you all very much for volunteering your time to support this effort. I recognize you are all very busy humans and we hope to use your time really efficiently and effectively. So hopefully everyone had a chance to review the background materials prior to this. And so before we get started into language for the farm impacts test, are there any questions or concerns from anybody on the RAC about the charge, about the charter, about the schedule? I am not seeing any hands raised right yet. No. Okay. So with that, let's get right to it and dive right into the farm impacts test. So this is
Hillary,
yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Gordon Howard. Have we clarified how members can participate? Should we ask them to raise hands when they wish to speak and such, if we want to go over that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So if you want to speak, go ahead and raise your hand. There's a little icon sort of at the side of your screen to raise your hand, and I'll go ahead and call on you. You can also drop a note into the chat if you can't figure out how to use the raise hand icon, and I'll go ahead and call on you as well. Right. And if you have any questions or complications during the meeting, go ahead and direct message Casaria Taylor in the chat or give her a call on the cell phone that was listed in the agenda for the meeting today. Okay. So the farm impacts test is codified at 215-296, and this is the criteria that's applied to all Type 2 uses in exclusive farm use zones. So it's something that comes up really regularly as part of planning practice in rural Oregon. So this is a very subjective test, which requires exercise of discretion on the part of the reviewing jurisdiction. And there was a lot of background on this test in the recorded video, so I'm not going to say too much more about the test other than that. My thought for the structure of this conversation is that I'm going to ask the planners in the group first to talk about their experience in implementing this test and how they go about crafting findings under the test, reviewing applications for it, and any challenges that might come up under them for them. Then I'd like to ask the farmers in the group what the test means to them. And then within that context, I'll ask other folks to jump into the conversation for your thoughts on the test and the language that we've proposed here. All right. So I really would like to start the conversation by asking planners maybe to share some of your experience reviewing application materials and crafting findings to address this test. So any of the planners want to volunteer to talk about their experience with that? Like Matry or Charles, would you like to? Okay, I've got 2 raised hands. 3. Okay, so Matry, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, sure. So it's we kind of go into an well, I guess I'll just tell you what I think. We typically go into an exhaustive description, so we expect and there was this Luba case laws, the Yamelas, was it, versus Yamhill County? So that's the one but a lot of the times applications don't come in with a complete impact analysis test. That's very, very common. So we have a handout that we provide applicants, and we usually quote this Luba case law and ask them to review that. I mean, we usually quote that and say that that's kind of part of the basis on what we're expecting all this information. But we generally require applicants to provide some kind of a map, and a tax map is usually fine, where they show us which parcels they're including as part of the impact analysis, a brief description of why they think that area is representative of the farm operations in the area, and then to list out all the farming uses and a brief description of the annual operations through the year and why they think the use that they're proposing will not significantly affect the farming practices. And based off of that, and using our own judgment, we kind of make the findings for the impact analysis. And one of the So for a lot of the uses, a lot of it is fairly established. I mean, some of them are clearly things like a tasting room or a processing facility. These are generally accepted commercial farm uses, so we are able to make findings to that effect. Or a lot of them are established already, like things like nurseries, where they're proposing some kind of commercial use in conjunction. So we're able to make adequate findings there. But sometimes there's this call for looking at a little bit of it cumulatively, where we run into a little bit of a struggle and to determine how exactly do we assess a cumulative impact and where do we put a stop. So that would be great if we could kind of touch on that a little bit in this discussion.
Right. So I'm hearing that you sound like you're pretty well set up with some handouts explaining how to put together evidence to support a farm impacts analysis. And it sounds like that's working pretty well for you, but you're still struggling with how to look at the cumulative impacts of a series of effects on a particular. Okay. And then Austin, how does your county look at that? What's your experience with reviewing?
Yeah, so we have sort of a lot of the same, I guess, issues and a lot of the same things that happen with us. We don't have a handout like that. A lot of times we just talk with people and we show them past cases. That's kind of I think our version of a handout is if someone comes in and is having a really hard time addressing criteria, I'll say, look at this past case, look how they did it with their business. How can you show that your business, your use how can you justify it like they justified theirs? And that's relatively easy when you have what I think planners would call, common commercial activities or common conditional uses coming through, like tractor repair, you have maybe a hemp processing facility, things like that. It gets tough when you have these one-off ideas or the new idea or something that's never been tested anywhere, which is fine. But then it's really hard for the applicant to then say, well, how much burden of proof do I need? And the tough part is they don't often come in with a real analysis of the farm uses around them. They may say there are farm uses around me, or there is hay, or there's grass seed around me, or there's generally grazing. But it's hard often to get them to really put in the effort or to see why they need to put in the effort to do that larger analysis, when a lot of times they come from the position of, well, I'm doing something that's relatively close to farming, so I believe it already is in harmony with farming and the farm zones and things like that, not going to significantly impact them. So that's a lot of what we deal with, is sort of is taking that step back and saying, well, how can you really justify, even though we know you think you know how it fits in, we need it to be shown on paper with these other details and these parcels examined, and getting that packaged is sometimes an issue.
And so it sounds like you have a lot of completeness conversations with your applicants to try to get them to
Definitely. It's the best if they come in and just talk to us first, and we can say, here's all the things you're gonna need to address. It's the toughest if they come in with an application ready to pay that day without talking to us first, and then you don't want to send them away, but if you take it in, there might be this information exchange you have to do for a while. So it's sort of balancing all that to get them what they want and get us the information we need.
Mm-hmm. All right. And Megan, how does this work in Umatilla? What is your experience with that there?
So we have a lot of the same issues that have already been shared. In Umatilla County, we do a lot of hand-holding with our applicants. And I think part of that's just because of where we are, and we deal with a lot of rural people that don't have the resources to get outside help with their applications. So oftentimes when we're processing these types of requests, we're lucky if they identify the adjacent farming types. And so a lot of the analysis falls on our planners, unfortunately. And in our experience, we don't have a lot of contested cases that end up getting appealed, but it's usually, unless there's a lot of opposition, defining a significant change is really difficult as a planner when you don't have anybody saying, this is going to affect my farming operation.
That makes sense to it's difficult to identify what is significant if you're not receiving feedback from the community and how it impacts them.
Yes.
Yeah. So Charles, or did you have anything to add? Or Amber?
I guess I would concur with the other planners that, completeness is always one of the steps that we want to complete, obviously in the complete application, and it's a struggle sometimes to get applicants to give, an answer more than yes, this, or no, this won't impact farm and forest. We look at the area, so a lot of it falls on the planners to handhold the applicants to demonstrate compliance as much as possible. But we look at, the aerials. I think the other thing that we have a lot of hobby farms, I guess, in Southern Oregon, so that would can make it a little more difficult too. We have, smaller EFU properties, so there's more of them necessarily that could be considered in the surrounding lands. So that's always something that we're looking at, is the impact. It's, there's usually not one or two large farmers that this is. It's probably 4 or 5 or more, obviously, that are surrounding a property that's looking for this proposed non-farm use. So that's something to consider, is that it's not always these mega farms that we have to consider.
So I'm hearing a couple of times it's so difficult to, help applicants identify, all of the farm operations that are happening in the surrounding area, to help them identify the actual farm practices that are happening on those properties. And then it sounds, Charles, like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but distinguishing between what is actually a commercial farm or farm use under 215-203, and something that might not necessarily rise to that level in the review. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I guess I said I maybe misspoke on a hobby farm. I guess is not for. I'm talking about small farms that are in the commercial for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
So I guess I did misspeak on versus just an actual, that is their hobby on the side. That's not for commercial purposes. I understand the differences there, but I misspoke about. I'm just talking about the size. These farms could be a lot smaller,
which would mean a lot more to consider in a review, depending on the character of the area.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Alyssa or Amber, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just echo the sentiments of the other planners. Lynn County sounds like it's pretty similar to a lot of the other counties where we have a hard time getting applicants to give us all the information that we need. And so there is a lot of working with them to help them identify, and a lot of that role in making the findings falls on the planners. And we don't have a ton of contested cases either. And so we kind of have the same struggle of how do we make findings showing where there is a significant impact when we're not getting that feedback. I think the main issue that tends to come up, at least here, is that people are like, well, what's significant? What is surrounding? Like, how far out do I have to look? Is it just next to me? Or someone be like, oh, my farm 5 miles away could be affected by this. So we, similar issues as everybody.
Thank you. And Alyssa, did you want to add anything as well? No. So then what about, so we heard a little bit of the challenge on the planning side when looking at these types of analyses. What's the surrounding area, helping an applicant to identify what are the actual farm operations, forest operations, the area, what are farm practices occurring on the properties, and how do you lead somebody to completeness? I love that Washington has some handout documents. It sounds like it could be very helpful. And I'd love to hear also from folks who own farm operations, which could be the subject of an impacts test. So Mickey or Mike, do you have thoughts you want to offer the group on what it means to be one of those farms that are in the surrounding area when the county is contemplating impacts related to a proposal?
You go, Mickey.
Okay, Mike, I'm gonna go. Everybody get ready. So the problems I see is the word significant. That is varies in everybody's own mind and operation. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is what farms, how far out do you have to go? So when you get a legal notice from the planning department, it's only within X number, feet or whatever of each operation. So a lot of farmers that will be impacted may not know anything's going on. So I would like to see something in there that identifies at least something like 3 miles out, or look in a map and how many farms are there. And I don't think it has to do with size. Whether you're a small farmer or a big farmer, it's the tipping point on what happens in the area, that every impact. And at some point, there's a tipping point. In my operation, I live sort of on a road that dead ends. So most of the people who come out here for a reason, and we know most of the rigs. But the problem is the people behind me are not farm ground. And I'll give you an example. I have sheep, I have livestock guard dogs, I have coyotes. There's a canyon, Willow Creek Canyon runs behind me. We have 4 packs of coyotes. I don't lose sheep to coyotes anymore, knock on wood. 3 years ago, I got new guard dogs when my other one died, and I thought, oh, I'll get away with it. I haven't had any kills in years. It took 6 months for the coyotes to figure out they were coming in and killing in the middle of the day, and they were killing between lambs 75 to 85 pounds, and they wiped out 30 lambs in 45 days. And we had hunters out, trappers out, and finally I got more guard dogs, and it has stopped. But the neighbors a mile down lost 3 calves to 1 pack of 7 coyotes like 30 days ago. So you got to think what happens. Well, the impact was I have somebody who lives behind me that likes to call and would say, your sheep are bellowing at 5:30 in the morning. Why are they doing that? And I'm going, well, that's the way the mom and the babies talk to each other, and they're going out to graze. Well, that wakes me up. Well, what type of significant impact is that? I've been here since 78. They moved in 10 years ago. The same when the neighbor runs their baler at night, they get complaints. So it's that type of stuff, but it's just all the little things that add up, and what's the tipping point. So where we live, it's a narrow road. It's very different, but if I go across the 2 major highways west, there's a lot more farm ground that is exposed, and they have a lot more conflicts. They have conflicts because the city of Metolios borders a lot of the farm ground. They have trash in their fields because there's always trash from people driving down the road. And when they go to do whatever crop they have to, either get a discount or hire a crew to go in and get the trash out of the field before they do the harvest. That type of stuff. They have a lot more theft. So there's a lot of conflicts that I think everybody doesn't think about. Part of it is, how big an area do you need to look at? And what is that new activity going to bring with it? And those are some key things I think of. And I'll let Mike go on from there, but I would like to have Jim Johnson, since he is ODA, he probably hears a lot more things than we do. I hear from all the neighbors and the people in our ag community. But he probably has a better voice statewide than I do. And I can talk about the impacts in Halfway on our farm there too, if you want to hear about those. But, those are same type of thing, trespass. But it all goes back to what is activity and what is the activity going to bring with it and what is the tipping point and how do you identify the financial costs. So significant to me is too broad, way too broad.
Okay.
So I'll let Mike go.
Thank you. I kind of see this issue that Mickey brought up also, and I don't know how the planners deal with it. It's a very difficult thing for planners. I'd like to see it simplify all this, make it very clear, but I still have a lot of trouble with significant change and significant cost. And something that is a significant change and a significant cost to me may be clearly very different than what is seen by the planners in an impact test. And I don't know how we answer that, but what I find is there's a lot of uncompensated time lost for farmers, and our employees are working in an area where there's a number of these sub-2 uses. That's what we really see is conflicts with our farming activities where there are the sub-2 uses. And if we complain about them, then we're the bad guy, even though they're out of compliance. The farmer then becomes the bad guy. And I hate that. And what does that cost me? And, you can't put a cost on that, but that's one of the most stressful things I think I've dealt with in 43 years farming, with the exception of maybe frost. But that idea that, well, yeah, your people parking at the fruit stand are in a place where I can no longer get my fruit harvest trucks out, and it's certainly not safe. And then I'm the bad guy, and I had a whole bad day over it during the middle of the harvest at the most stressful time. So what does that cost? What is that worth? The other thing that I really see about this, though, it's not future oriented. It's ag impact now. And I can give you an example of this. Suppose I'm a hay farmer. I raise hay. I've got some particular sub-2 use next to me, and I decide I can make more money raising dairy heifers. Well, I may not be able to get approval for a CAFO, even though I only have a few 100 dairy heifers. I want to lock them up in a barn in the winter so they're not in the mud. I can't get approved for that in the future. So I don't see that it's future oriented, which really concerns me. The other thing is there's no conditions in here for when we did the impact analysis, and guess what? We were wrong. Guess what? The county was wrong. What happens then? Well, there's no process there. There's no process for the neighboring farmer who's really impacted. At that point, he's pretty much just in trouble. His right to farm is really impacted. That's really about all I have to say. One thing we see here is fruit theft, which is a little different in some areas. And I've caught people stealing fruit off my trees, and their response often is, "You have lots of it." Well, it's still, that's how I make my living. And we see more and more fruit theft in areas where there's more and more sub-2 uses in the.
Oh, did we lose Mike? Mike, I think we lost your audio feed.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. You're back.
I'm back. Is that better without the picture? Anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to say, but it is a very serious issue to farmers. I bought ground in the exclusive farm use zone, and I thought it was going to be the exclusive farm use zone. And I don't know, Hillary, I sent Hillary a picture. I don't know if she wants to put it up at some point.
Sure.
To me, this kind of illustrates a problem. When you get in an area with a lot of sub-2 uses, it's supposed to be an exclusive farm use zone. I'm supposed to be able to farm. every time there's a car that goes by, I have to find a place, pull off in the ditch or get the heck out of the way every time there's a car. And I can tell you there's sub 2 uses where there's 1,000 cars on a weekend. And a weekend to me is just like any other day of the week. There's 7 days in a week and every one of them's the same. You go out and work on the farm. So this is a good example, really, to me, shows a real issue. We're allowed as farmers to haul our farm equipment up and down the road. A lot of us have small farms in different places that we have to get to. And this is a nightmare. And the more traffic you have, the more my blood pressure goes up. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we're hearing, I think one of the things that strike me is the sort of lost time, the uncompensated time to address issues that come up with neighbor conflicts. In addition to a number of other impacts, how do you, if you don't have farmers that are participating in the review, identify the sort of breadth and scope of potential impacts? And Lauren, you had some comments you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a little bit on what Mike said. If there's a way we could incorporate into the rules that allows for some sort of accountability to the person who's applying for the use or to the county to report how it's going, so potential impacts, and then so maybe if there's a way to weigh that later on. So the county, maybe they don't want to be as conservative and they're saying, okay, this is what the applicant has said, this is how they say they will or will not impact agriculture. If there's some sort of accountability for that later on, so that if it's approved and there is an issue, that it can be addressed, not by the farmer going in and bearing the cost of that, but the person who has the use or the county who approved the use to say, hey, we followed up on this. This is what we're seeing a year out, 5 years out, and how it's impacting might be helpful since, like Mike said, a lot of it is speculative. You say, yes, this is going to impact them, or no, this isn't, and this is why, just to make sure that they're following up on that, because otherwise it's a cost that's borne by the farmers who aren't participating in that conditional use. And so I think that it would be, I think, good for them to see that later down the line, just to make sure that they're following up on what was in the application is actually what's happening on the ground in the future.
So this is a topic we often hear about, is how do we, enforce provisions over time. And I heard Mike also ask, how do you account for future impacts that may materialize over time related to the use? So I'll ask Samantha to share your thoughts, and then Jim.
Sam, you're muted.
Thanks, Jim. You think I would have had that figured out by now.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So I really appreciate the comments made by Mike and Mickey. I would like to add an additional perspective that oftentimes it is going to be a farmer who is going to be an applicant. I think a lot of, and this is going to vary jurisdictionally, but we see this a lot with commercial activities in conjunction with farm use and agritourism events. They are going to be subject to the farm impacts test. And so I just want to call to, a little bit of awareness to the fact that, yes, oftentimes we are having sub 2 uses that are not farm related, but a lot of the time they're going to be farmers applying and are going to have to be applying the farm impacts test themselves, and that's to further the success of their agricultural operation. And so, yes, goal 3 is important for preserving farmland, but we also have to think about what's important for preserving farms, exactly what Mike and Mickey were saying. So just as much as sub 2 uses can be, if not permitted correctly, and if there's not proper sideboards on it, can cause significant impacts negatively. There also can be very important to preserving our agricultural economy, particularly when we get, like I said, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use and on-farm experiences and all of those great things that we love in Oregon. So I just want to call that to question and then say, or call attention. And then I also just say, I'm not sure if we're talking yet about the actual language that's in front of us, but I do have some substantial concerns with subsection C. I really appreciate the planners on the phone saying, I totally get that oftentimes you get applications that are incomplete or putting the burden really on the planner to have to do the legwork of the applicant. That definitely happens, and I totally get that. But subsection C to me seems like a significant overcorrection. And I'm not sure how an applicant would successfully meet the burden of subsection C, because I don't know how an applicant is going to be able to know every single accepted farm practice that is existing on neighboring lands. We grow over 250 commodities in Oregon. We are innovators in the country for agricultural practices. A lot of stuff is grown inside and will continue to be growing inside as we see a shift to hydroponics and other things like that. So I'm just not sure how an applicant is going to be able to identify and describe the farm operations and all of the accepted farm practices that is happening on each parcel and whatever surrounding area. And then conversely, how a local government with that language is going to be able to verify that and make a decision based on substantial evidence in the record. I just think that I appreciate wanting to give more direction on how someone should apply here, but I think this is extremely granular, and it could really prevent people from successfully being able to apply for sub 2 usage, which are allowed under state law.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. And I'm responding to a couple of things in the chat. So with the context, from hearing from the planning department, some of the challenges they face and providing findings, and hearing, from farmers, some of the concerns that they have, when farm operations are, subject to potential impacts, sort of good context for this conversation. So if other folks, want to offer observation or thoughts, please do go ahead and raise your hand. Or drop sort of a note in a chat that you'd like to be called on. And I do want to, thank you, Samantha, for the segue into, focusing a little bit more on this language. Yeah. And sort of the thoughts and feelings about the language in achieving some of the purposes that we've talked about, adding clarity, improving consistency of implementation. So Jim, you're next, and then Catherine, and then Ken, and then Blair.
Okay, great. I've got a lot of notes here after listening to a lot of this. I have been fortunate enough to have to work with both planners and farmers on this issue. I get calls from county planning departments asking help to analyze through this process, and also I get help asked from farmers to help them to review this type of criteria as things are presented in the process. I think it's one of the questions brought up by the county planners, and I get this a lot, is what is the review area? And Samantha talked about the diversity of Oregon agriculture. That's why it's really difficult, and I don't support an objective half mile or 1 mile as the review area. When you look at the type of agriculture involved, that's going to be different. It could be a half mile in certain cases, and it could be 5 miles or even larger in another case. And let me give you an example. I was recently involved with a bunch of farmers in East Multnomah County dealing with a proposal for a utility facility, and the study area that the applicant put in was going to be a half a mile. Well, this was one of the highest density nursery areas in the entire state of Oregon. And the factors that really come into play in terms of identifying the area was not just a mileage thing. This was a 2-county area. It straddles 2 counties there on the line. The nursery industry requires a lot of transportation, so you needed to look at connectivity, getting the product to the market, getting it to I-84, getting it to Highway 26, and so a half mile just wasn't cutting it. And one of the points that the farmers were making in this situation was the study area needs to take into account such things as the diversity of agriculture in the area, the intensity of agriculture in the area, the connectivity, how do people come and go out of the area? Is it just one point of ingress and egress into an area, or multiple points? What's the topography of the area that can maybe allow for buffers or the like, or actually be hindrances? So there's a lot of elements that go into this, and it's really a spatial geographic analysis on a case-by-case basis based on the site and situation of the impacted uses or the like. So that's the thing about review area. In terms of another issue that comes up a lot when I'm talking to people regarding the farm impacts test is distinguishing the difference between what is farm use and what is a farming practice. There may be a single farm use on a subject property, but there may be 15 different farming practices associated with that farm use. And that's really what the test asks is, how are the farming practices implicated that are used to conduct the farm use on the property? And so that can get there could be 45 different farming practices going on in one situation, or 4 in another. And so again, diversity is really an element here. Item 3, I get this all the time. Well, gee, right to farm protects the farmers, so there's no impact. Right to farm does not protect farmers from land use impacts. Right to farm deals with nuisance and trespass situations that go through lawsuits. Right to farm is not a land use element. It is a nuisance or trespass legal element. And even then, if a farmer is ultimately going to win in a right to farm case provided by immunity, he's going to have to hire an attorney, he or she, to defend themselves in court. It's a civil action. It's not a land use action. So I'm constantly reminding people that right to farm is not an excuse to just say non-farm uses can occur in an area because they're going to be protected. Right to farm may protect that farmer from losing a lawsuit dealing with such things as odor and noise, but it's not going to protect the farmer from trash coming over onto the property, from trespass, from recreational users, from somebody picking Mike's fruit. Those are not nuisance or trespass cases. Those are land use conflicts. So it's really, really important to understand the difference between right to farm and impacts associated with land use. Significant. When we talk about whether something is significant or the like, the real experts in these cases in terms of what is a significant impact to the farm operations by a non-farm use, the experts are the farmers themselves. The farmers are going to be the ones that are going to tell you how they're going to be impacted, and that should be what the evidence should be related to. And so, it really comes down, to me, the real issue here is what is going to impact the farmer in terms of those farming practices, and what is a farming practice. And I always remember Bruce Chapin down in Mission Bottom here in Marion County talking about significant impact to his ability to farm is the fact that the non-farm uses are increasing the costs of rent values and land prices, that he can't acquire land or rent land because he can't compete with the non-farm uses. Without a definition of what farming practices entails, courts a lot of times have said rental values or property values are not an impact of the farmers, yet it's probably one of the major impacts that non-farm uses place on farm uses in Oregon. And then just lastly, Sam talked about the Section C language. I'd just like to remind everybody, the language that Hillary has up there in red is actually the language out of the court cases. This isn't something that was just we all came up with. This is what the courts have said in terms of how to interpret that. So unless we're going to change the statute, we need to be looking at that interpretation of what the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals have said in such cases as stop the dump, and take that into account. I'm going to end there. I could talk forever on this, and I'll come back later as needed. So thanks, Hillary.
Great, thanks, Jim. So we heard Jim talk a little bit, touch on a number of topics that got raised already: farm use versus farm practices, surrounding area, being dependent on the sort of character of the local agricultural community, land use impacts versus what is actually protected under right to farm, which is focused on, farm. And then the definition of significant. And thanks for pointing out that what we're, now trying to get into is really this language here that we're proposing in the context of the review. So, Catherine, you had your hand up next.
Yes, I'd like to touch on three issues that have been raised. I'll be brief. One, what strikes me as I hear the county planning directors speak is the great reliance on the applicants' ideas on what constitutes impacts to surrounding farms. I think that's really an over-reliance. I think the county should be going directly to the surrounding farmers and finding out from them what the impacts may well be. Not only that, but a lot of applicants may well not be motivated to provide even information they know to the counties. I don't see how a good assessment can be made without going to without the county and not the applicant going to the surrounding farm and forest operations. So that's one point. Another is the courts have tried to define the term significant. And what they've done is come up with important influence or effect, but those are really just synonymous terms for significant, and we're still left with a subjective term and not an objective one. It would be nice to have an objective term to use, and I do want to draw people's attention to Ron Eber's a submission of proposed language. Essentially, he's saying that any forced change for farm or forest operators is in itself a significant change. And I think that's worth talking about. And we've essentially heard that from some of the farmers here today. Any forced change is a significant change for a couple of reasons, really. And that's that a lot of farm operations operate right at the margins, increasingly so in this day and age. And so what may seem to others like a small change may well be a significant change if in fact it is forced. And secondly, as has been raised by others today, the idea of cumulative impacts that each are contributing to impacts on farms. And finally, I'd like to see some of the court language. There's one more piece of court language that is not yet incorporated into the proposed wording here, and that comes from Stop the Dump, and that would be that the standard would be a change not just that will have an important influence or effect, or one that will be likely to, or have, or is likely to. So that is in the Stop the Dump case, and certainly should be part of this language as well. That's it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Charles, Charles had a comment that sort of related to something that Catherine brought up, which was the letter from Ron Eber. Again, I think we covered, when you receive something from the public that goes to multiple RAC members, please forward it to me so we can get that to everyone. Charles, did you have a particular point on that question about?
No, I was just, Catherine brought it up, but if it was going to be a discussion around that letter and so forth from that. So I'm sure people will have comments.
All right, thank you. And Ken, you also were next. Did you have additional comments to add to that?
Yes, I guess is the short answer. I mean, from the applicant's perspective, I think what we're hearing is a lot of frustration on both sides of this question. How do you address what the impacts are? When we're coming and looking at, let's say something as simple as a non-farm dwelling, how do you identify what the impacts are? How do you identify what a farm practice is? How do you even identify in some instances what crop is being farmed if any. And that's one of the things that we really struggle with, is trying to get the best information as we possibly can. And that has, and at least in my practice, included knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm a neighbor, or I'm 3 miles away, and we're looking at doing this particular non-farm use that's allowed. How would this impact you? And I would say that 9.5 out of 10 times we get a door slammed in our face. So I think that part of the tension here is that we have to have a open and honest conversation on both sides of this about, hey, if we are trying to actually identify what your farm is or does and how we can or will impact it, or how we can mitigate for that, that would be helpful. But what we do have is an Oregon system of land use where the applicant bears the burden based upon the best evidence in the record. And if we're only getting one side of the record, then I think it provides conflict to begin with. I also wanted to make one comment about what Mr. Johnson said, which was farm practices needs to be defined. And in fact, farm practice needs to be defined. And in fact, it is. It's defined in ORS 215-203-2C, and it's a mode of operation. And so if you are performing a particular farming use in a particular way, that's your farm practice. It's not leasing or buying land. That is another cost of farm use, sure, but that's not itself a farm practice. And I'm not disputing that there could be an impact of rising prices. I'm just saying that farm practice is defined in statute, and that is something that we need to consider. I don't want to provide a lot more disagreement, because I think we agree on more things than not in this particular conversation. Where we have is ambiguity, and how do we deal with that? I also think that his comments on surrounding areas were very well taken, because it could be that half a mile is a relevant distance, and it could be that 10 miles is a relevant distance. It really depends. But from an applicant's perspective, or maybe even a planning perspective, how do you draw that circle and figure it out? Well, if there's only one mode of a road going in and out, and the main potential impact is traffic, then you might isolate it to that particular road or traffic impact. But when we're trying to figure out what exactly is the surrounding area, that is a huge issue when it comes to figuring out what impacts are, and a huge issue in dealing with a farm practice as a whole. Because if I am irrigating my land, and that's my farm practice, and I do it through very inefficient flood irrigation, is my farm stand going to impact your irrigated agriculture? Probably not, but it might in other ways. And so we just really need to understand from both sides how to identify and better plan for mitigation. And I'm not sure how you put that in a rule, but that's all I would say in response at this point.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And next we'll hear from Blair.
Hi, thank you, Hillary. So I think everybody agrees that this subjective language is horrible and we'd like to do away with it. But unfortunately, it's the law, and it's what the Supreme Court said. And I would love to find more objective ways to define this, but I think it's way beyond the scope of this RAC this year. I've thought about this a lot. There's not going to be agreement immediately. It's something that really has to be hammered out. So I think we're probably not going to get clear and objective standards by December, when LCDC is going to adopt a rule. I do think that we can introduce some clear and objective guidance, meaning when you're looking at farm impacts, applicant, county, you may consider things like traffic, the time that it takes for a farmer to negotiate with his neighbors who are complaining about their guard dogs, or about their combine making too much noise, or you're in the North Unit Irrigation District and you're running the gen all night. So things that they can consider, like, look at this, because it seemed like the other issue that's really a problem, in addition to subjective, mushy language, is the lack of farmers who show up at these, because it seems very dependent on the proper application of this criteria for farmers to come in and testify. So and I'm hearing people say that we're not at a place yet where we feel comfortable about saying what the area is or how to define it, but perhaps there could be a broader notice area. sort of following up on Mickey Killingsworth's statements, so that more farmers were aware and they could come in and they would give some idea to the county and the applicant. This is this agricultural area. These are the potential impacts. These are the farm practices. Because, Ken talked about going door to door. That's pretty labor intensive and tough. And I think it's admirable that he's tried to do that. But there may be just getting more notice to more farmers. So those are my immediate comments.
Great, thank you, Blair. So what I'm hearing there is that in addition to sort of this rulemaking, which is really meant to codify case law and sort of tighten up and clarify some of the standards that perhaps an agency guidance document on the conduct of the test, sort of describing, thoughts on identifying surrounding areas, identifying practices, and potential impacts to look at might be helpful. Austin.
Yeah, so I had two kind of pieces about the language and about the previous discussion we just had. And I think Ron brought up a great point in his comments that yes, I think it could be said, it could be argued that any change to a farm practice is a significant change. I think a lot of us could agree with that. I think what we see oftentimes more on the application at a staff level is the argument that there will be no significant change. And so you can see both argued a lot of ways, is that there will be no significant change or that any change is significant. And so I think probably this group needs to figure out which side probably we lean more to. Do we want people to prove that any change is significant, or that any change is significant, or that there's no change happening at all? And I see the pros and cons to both of those. But the interesting thing to me about the language in red, the new language, is that it's very similar to the non-farm dwelling language we already implement for non-farm dwellings. We see people doing analysis of 2,000 acres around parcels for non-farm dwellings every time they have to do them. So it's not unheard of to have to do this type of analysis, this level of analysis, but it would definitely be raising the bar on the analysis for these types of applications. But not something that's unknown. We deal with this type of stuff all the time. So I see the pros and cons of both of them.
Okay, thank you, Austin. And Jan.
Yes, conservation districts work with farmers, ranchers, and woodland owners, and those folks sometimes approach district staff with issues about protecting farm and forest properties. And the districts really need to have more and better tools to share with those managers that would allow them to work with their constituents. So what we're doing here will help in that regard. But it seems the issues brought are increasing, and I'm hopeful we can get a better handle on it. But one issue that arises that is really difficult to determine the extent of cumulative impacts is really the need for some kind of technical base mapping for the cumulative impacts to be fully recognized. Mm-hmm. That would give both applicants and the planners a tool for better addressing the issues. And I could see where if that mapping process was something that could be used as a reliable tool, that we could then look at what impacts would particularly disadvantage a property in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And that is something that came up in our technical working group conversation, and the department is definitely looking at our mapping capabilities and looking at possible sort of GIS projects going forward into the future. So thank you, Jan. And then Lauren, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I did just want to highlight, we're talking a lot about significant, the impacts on farms. And I think that Sam's point is well taken, that we do still need to have the ability for farmers to vertically integrate their operations, and even to have agritourism activities that help the public engage with farmers on the farm, because these all have a positive impact on the local farming and ranching community. And so we need to make space for some of the impacts to be positive ones, not just negative ones, because yeah, a vertically integrated operation may have more traffic on the road, but it's traffic that's beneficial to not just that farmer, but they could extend those however they vertically integrated to other farmers in the community, or that agritourism that highlights what they're growing or producing in that area could increase a better public knowledge and understanding of farming in that community. And so I think we do need to make space for that as well.
Great, thank you. And I note that Maitri, you dropped a comment. Did you want to go ahead and voice that as well?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I just feel like figure like everybody pointed out, significant is a very kind of hard to, it's very, very subjective. So if there was some kind of a maybe a rubric that we could follow, if there was some guidance in that matter, or if there's a set of questions we could follow, one leading to the other on a yes/no kind of a guideline, a loop sort of, or just a set of questions and with some basic guidelines, then that would be very, very helpful, where the applicant as well as staff are able to kind of get some guidance on how to determine whether a use is significantly impacting farming practices or not.
Right, thank you. And so if we've heard a couple of times about our changed definition of it, significant here. We're incorporating sort of the guidance from the court on significance, which is essentially the common definition of significance, an important influence or effect. And I'm also hearing a desire to sort of further define that term, either through providing guidance, including a rubric. There's some other opinions about whether significant goes far enough in terms of capturing the intent of what actually constitutes an effect on a farm. Other thoughts along those lines, other thoughts about the language that's being proposed here. Jeff, I think, also had some thoughts, but I'm going to call on Charles and then Mike, and then maybe we can get some more comments on actual language or language additions.
Yeah, thank you. I was really concerned. I understand that the important influence term is from the Luba cases and the court cases, but for me, it seems like we're just exchanging. We have the word significant, and we're just replacing it with a word important influence, which will also lead to ambiguity and more court cases, and then we're fighting over what does important influence mean. So I feel like there's some I have some concern with that it's not really clarifying what I understand that significant is in the common definition, or important influences in the common definition of significant, but it doesn't. We're just exchanging the terms in the language, which I don't think is necessarily helpful.
And so you would like to see more guidance or more parameters there, essentially. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I have obvious concerns too, but I think we're making progress with the wording we have, and I understand the limits of the process, and I pretty much would accept this wording and hope that someday we can do better, but I don't think that's the process we're involved in. And so I can support the wording. The one thing I would say, though, in terms of, it was mentioned maybe by Samantha or someone, that it's hard to know what the accepted farming practices are in an area. I'm a farmer. I live in an area of farmers. I can tell you that almost every farmer in the area knows exactly the farm practices of every other farmer. And if they change their practice tomorrow morning, almost everybody will know by tomorrow night. And we just know what goes on in our area. We know who's doing what. Some people know what the new tractor I bought before I even got it home. And that's to understand, and there will be exceptions. There will be rare exceptions when somebody planted something, put something in a greenhouse nobody can see, but I don't think it's that difficult if you're a farmer in an area and you're asked what are the accepted farming practices. You can go through various iterations of all of them off the top of your head that are 99% correct. So I don't think that's too difficult a thing to achieve.
Can I provide some clarification to Mike's point on my point?
Sure. Go ahead, Smith.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Mike, but I don't read what you said as what subsection CA requires. I don't read this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone on the department, that you're looking at a generalized area and making a, generalized analysis about what people are doing in the county or what people aren't. It says you've got to make an identification and a description of the lands. You have to document what, those operations are, and you have to document what those accepted farm practices on each farm or forest parcel is. So it's a much more granular and burdensome analysis than I think what you and I would both agree would be the more reasonable approach. And I don't know, I mean, I've got Stop the Dump up, but if maybe someone can put in the chat what the other case is, and I'm sure it was in the materials, and I apologize for just not having those reviewed thoroughly, where we're really talking about each practice on each parcel. If someone could let me know which case that is.
So that was from Stop the Dump. It was from the guidance there. And there's some quotes that were also included in the meeting packet materials, sort of from that case, documenting the direction from the courts on that. Amber, did you have some comments as well?
Yes, thanks, Hillary. I just wanted to echo what has already been said by some of the county planners around the challenges with obtaining enough information in the record to make findings, and working with the applicants to make sure that the application is complete. And certainly appreciate, I heard others comment on the challenges also on the landowner and applicant side of gathering that information from knocking on doors and getting that information from surrounding farmers. And also appreciate hearing the comment about that it would be helpful to have a base maps resource for us to look at to identify surrounding farm practices. I'm just wondering if understanding that there's constraints within this process that with defining terms in a more clear and objective manner, because the statute is existing and this is a rulemaking effort. But if there's an opportunity to add guidance, staff are not farming experts, sort of general county staff, that is, we're sort of generalists, and we're evaluating applications in the land use process. And I'm wondering if it's possible to have guidance worked into the rule with various factors that can be considered, so that there is more there that we can point applicants to, as well as make findings to whether certain things have been taken into account, or if it's possible to add some sort of procedural guidance. And I think that's been touched on a little bit, maybe with regards to the notice area.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Amber. So just to clarify, the charge for this particular rulemaking really is to codify case law, with the certain goal of making these reviews more clear and consistently implemented across the state. So that's the charge for this particular rulemaking. I'm also hearing that there is a need for, additional guidance and potentially additional work on this topic now going forward in the future, that it may exceed the scope of this particular charge. And, maybe that looks like a guidance document from the agency, on conduct of the review, as it's sort of codified in rule based on an interpretation of guidance from the courts. All right, Justin, you had then Rory and then Jeff.
Justin Green, everybody. Just wanted to, I agree with the comments on paragraph B. Looking at this from a legal perspective and just having had implemented policies in the natural resources world, important influencer effect, it seems very similar to significant. And if that language, what I've heard is that language isn't a case, so it wants to be included in there, but that's not, I can't say that's the most helpful term to use, because important is just as subjective as significant, meaningful, substantial, all those kind of things. That's really, I'm not sure how much guidance and clarity that's going to provide staff and applicants. So that's a tricky one. As far as as paragraph C, I do find it helpful when looking at this from the perspective of implementing regulatory policies and also assisting with land use issues in the past and zoning issues, that identifying some of the factors that should be considered, and I think we've seen this in case law, things that should be considered, is important. And something, traffic, noise, appearance, trespass, garbage, all those kind of things, incorporating that as factors, I think is important. As far as C's goal of, it's kind of like a third thing here, as far as C's goal of trying to get more complete applications, I think it is helpful to have language that identify, say, this is the information that, we're going to find useful when reviewing an application. This will make it complete. So I think it's helpful to have this, but you can't expect an applicant to know what's going on their neighbor's property. In common practice, that may be happening. But we do see a lot of privacy issues when it comes to agriculture, where people don't want information shared. So, layered maps, all those kind of things are great tools, but they're privacy concerns that I've heard in different contexts that may come up with that. So something to the effect of, to the extent that is known, please identify this in the application. Something like that may provide somebody that is putting together an application a little bit more clarity on what to include, because we see, across the state, no matter what you're looking at when you're looking at zoning issues, you do see various levels of experience in interacting with regulations, policies, and laws. And so you're going to get a wide variety of different applicants. And so what's the best way to help everybody is to provide, you want the average citizen to be able to review this and understand what's expected of them and not have to hire a lawyer. So I think identifying those factors and that what information is going to be helpful would be really important. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So again, another comment sort of speaking to maybe the need to provide additional guidance on to assist counties and applicants in obtaining a complete set of evidence to satisfy these criteria. All right, Rory and then Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll also, throw my name in the pool of people proposing a little more clarity in types of impacts to give more clarity on both sides. And I think Blair was saying we just aren't going to get to a clear and objective type test, but listing some of those factors, to consider, a non-exclusive list, noise, dust, traffic, things like that, I think would be helpful, at least as a starting place, to give everyone a basis of the types of impacts we're looking at. And then the other comment I wanted to make was kind of on the temporal aspect of farm practices. I think Mike talked about future impacts and how to deal with those that can't be foreseen at the time of an application. I'm thinking about, Mickey could tell us more of the details here, but we've got fallowed fields in Jefferson County because of the drought. So there could be a neighboring property that was in production 2-3 years ago, hasn't been recently, but it's likely that operation could resume. Or rangeland that was grazed a couple decades ago, but it's been on the market. Who knows? There's many reasons why that farm practice that is perhaps likely to occur again is not currently happening at the time of an application. And what Catherine pointed out about the language from Stop the Dump, that calls about or identifies impacts that will be likely to have an important influence effect.
Yeah.
I do think some of that language from the Supreme Court's decision there accounts for not necessarily like measurable impacts of current farm practices, but likely impacts of accepted farm practices in the area.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Rory. And so I would just also add that if you have specific changes to the rule language you'd like to suggest, go ahead and send those to me after this call. I've already received some this afternoon that are going to be going out with the meeting notes as well. So again, if you have specific changes to the rule language, go ahead and email that to me directly. Jeff.
Yeah, a few comments. First of all, I'm very sympathetic to the comments of the county planners in terms of trying to somehow reduce what, excuse me, what the affected area is and what the farming practices are. I would say that to a certain extent, depending upon the county and depending upon the planner, there's going to be some knowledge on the part of staff. And they can tell the applicant, you have to at least cover this. Beyond that, I would say that there is probably a great variance of alertness from county to county. So as Mike said, if he sneezes, his neighbors, you can put it this way, if he sneezes, his farming neighbors will know before he can even cover his mouth. It's very different in some other counties. And I think that the most important evidence that I've seen in the cases that I've been involved in is from the affected farmers, often at some distance from the site. So I don't know if we can address it in this setting, but I think we need to look at the notice area for these sorts of applications. Sometimes the grapevine, as Mike suggested, is rapid. Sometimes there's none. But the best evidence overcoming Ken's concerns about privacy and secrecy on the part of farmers, let them come out and discuss what they do and what their concerns are and what the impacts will be. And you can encourage that by increasing the notice area. So really it's two-pronged. Number one, the planners know of it. And they can suggest to the applicants what at a minimum they need to do. I would suggest also that on a case-by-case basis, the area that you look at may not be symmetrical. It may not be 1 mile in diameter from the farm. It may have fingers and tentacles. So it's just decided on a case-by-case basis. There's not too much guidance, I don't think, that can be given in the rules except to point that out. It's evidence-based. Then, Hillary, you indicated that additional language has been and will be submitted. And I just wanted to touch on language that I sent in late this morning that people will be looking at that is in fact based on the case law. So in Stop the Dump, conditions were adopted by the county that created obligations on the part of the affected farmer. That if your fruit is tainted by our impacts, we'll buy it at market price. Well, it doesn't account for the fact that you're going to lose your commercial market. And also in that case, there was a condition that the applicant, a dump operator, would send people onto the neighboring farm to pick up the litter that was blowing over, thereby trampling the crops. So the holding and Stop the Dump included in the Supreme Court recognition that you can't force the mitigation upon the affected farmer if he doesn't want it. Can't make them sell their crops, their tainted crops to you You can't make them pay for cleanup of their property or accept your trespassers that you hired to come onto their property to clean it up. And then the other language I proposed, which is in subsection D, relates, in my recent experience, to something Jim Johnson mentioned about this utility facility in East Multnomah County, where the construction period involving tens of thousands of trucks truckloads will go on for 5 to 7 years. And the nurserymen are absolutely lit. And the Farm Bureau is lit. And the hearings officer reached the conclusion that the construction period doesn't count, which is absurd. And so the subsection D I propose addresses that to say that construction impacts may in fact count, depending upon the evidence. You know, some of these nurserymen will lose their customers permanently. And the primary dust and related impacts come from construction, not later. So I just wanted to highlight those two things, which are derived from the case law. In the case of the construction impacts, they come from one of the Von Rupkin cases. Thanks.
And thank you, Jeffrey. And again, that sort of language proposal would be circulated along with the meeting notes after this meeting. All right, and Ken.
I'll be real quick, or at least I think I'll be real quick. The first thing I would say is I'm really interested to see what Jeff put together. I think that'll hopefully be helpful. I do think that the temporal comment that Jeff just made, which was impacts are going to be early and then not afterwards, that might be something that should be considered. But I think when we're looking at a use as a whole, we're supposed to be looking at it from the lifespan of the use. And so if we're looking at something for 100 years and there's going to be impact for a year, or in that case 5, it may mean that it's not significant over that time period. Maybe it is, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. The one thing I do want to offer is there is a goalpost rule involved. And when we're talking about later impacts of who knows what farm practices later, or fallow land in Jefferson County, or things of that nature, there is a statutory definition, and it requires the current employment of the land for that particular farm use. And so current employment of land is real. And I think that when we're looking at impacts from an applicant's perspective, if you have fallow land and it's been fallowed for decades and there's not a farm use, you're not going to be impacting that farm. So I think that's something that's important to recognize as well. Current employment of land needs to continue to stay when we're looking at any rule. Otherwise, it's, in my opinion, going to be completely inconsistent with state law.
All right, thank you, Ken. So we are about time to wrap up this particular discussion. Jim has got his hand in. Well, Jim, if you want to add a few more comments, and then I'd like to take a quick break, maybe just 3-4 minutes, and then pivot into the conversation on commercial activities in conjunction with farm use today. If you have proposed additions, edits to the rule language, again, go ahead and send them to me. If you have other thoughts or comments that pop up for you after the conclusion of this meeting today on this topic, go ahead and send your additional thoughts to me, and we'll capture those and circulate those as meeting notes. So Jim, did you want to
just a quick
close out our conversation on that?
Just a quick point. Current employment of land for farm use includes lands lying fallow. It includes lands that are associated with preparation. It includes land
for 1 year though. For 1 year though, Jim.
Does not.
That's what the statute says. It says lands lying fallow for 1 year as a normal and regular requirement of good animal agricultural husbandry. So it specifically says 1 year.
It also includes wastelands. It also includes lands used for the disposal of waste management for animal products. It's not just about the things that people typically say, driving a tractor around and running irrigation lines. So,
understood.
All right. So why don't we take a quick couple-minute break to grab a stretch, grab some water, and then we'll come back and sort of pivot into commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. So we're just take a little couple of minutes here. All right, thanks, folks. All right, so it looks like we have just about everybody back now. And so we have about an hour to continue our conversation today. Thank you everybody for volunteering your time for such a long haul meeting. So hopefully you got a little stretch in and a glass of water. So the next topic that we have, on the agenda today is commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. And this is something that our technical working group did spend a lot of time talking about. And, there are a lot of other sort of ideas and questions and concerns around the topic of commercial activities in conjunction with farm use that we're aware of, that are documented in the technical working group summary scoping report that was presented to LCDC. And there are other aspects of the commercial activities in conjunction with farm use criteria and review that we may be considering in future rulemakings as part of the sort of ongoing work plan. But the charge today is really focused on codifying case law related to this use. It's a use that's very vaguely defined in statute, and our rule does not expand upon it at all. Back in, I think it was 2015, our agency did develop model code language that was a part of a sort of code updates program that captured some of those case law standards, and they were recommended for counties to consider adopting into their ordinance. Right. And about half of the planners on the call today have language that's similar to our model ordinance in the code, and about half of them don't, which is really interesting. And so I'd love to hear from county planners about their experience with working with commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. I'm just very curious to know if the review is easier, with those codes that have the model code language and versus those without. What we are recommending for adoption is essentially what we have in our model code, with the addition of some guidance from a more recent case that Austin is probably fairly aware of. It was the agri-tainment case. And so what we're recommending is essentially to codify the guidance that we have been providing to counties since 2015, 2016 into our rules with the addition of some case law coming from that agri-tainment case from Marion County. So I'd love to start off this conversation actually again by asking the planners, about their experience with commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, and maybe just their observations on their own code language there. So Austin, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to start. So we've pretty much got what's in front of us. We've got, except for, the B and C at the bottom, which is the more kind of, I guess, strict and precise language, which I like. I think that's good. What I was going to say basically is I think commercial conjunctions are relatively easy permits to apply for or review. It's relatively easy to make that connection to farm use. I think it's pretty straightforward to say that you're a customer or supplier of farm uses, and how do you integrate and enhance the local agricultural community, right? I think that's relatively straightforward. What we've seen, and with agri-tainment, and actually with the case I just did, we'll see, you guys might end up hearing about it. It might go to LUBA. We'll see if there's an appeal, but we had a commercial use in conjunction come through last month, and it was for an RV park for farm worker housing. And it's really what it is. It's to rectify a code violation where someone had 15 RVs on their property, and this was their way to say, how can we permit this as something in relation to farm use, because it's an EFU zone. And so we issued a denial on that one, and they were arguing, there's some connection to farm use because it's providing housing. Obviously, there's other housing provisions in code that you would apply for if you want to do farm housing. And so I think this subsection here at the bottom, B and C, especially B here though at the bottom, that really drives home the point, there needs to be a direct connection between that use and agriculture, and it makes it kind of shores up the ability to speculate about almost anything being a commercial use in conjunction with farm use, just like the city of Sandy case. So I like this language. I think it would help the types of things we see coming in. I don't know about other county planning directors or staff members, but there's a lot of what I would call inspired commercial uses in conjunction coming through. People are trying to see what they can sort of get through at this time, is what I'm seeing.
All right, thanks, Austin. That's really good feedback. So Marion County, your code pretty much does have the language that's from our model code.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. We do. It's got one more. It's got a D on there. I forget exactly what it says, but it's basically that.
Yeah. And Megan, Umatilla.
Yeah, we have not adopted the model code language. I wish we would have. A few years ago, our planning commission approved a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use that was for a construction business. And the argument of the applicant was that the construction business was serving farmers because they were doing excavation work. They were helping them install, drain fields for their farm shops. It was $1 away from farming, was their argument. And so I agree with Austin that people are getting very creative with the commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. As staff, we interpreted the rule as there has to be a farm use occurring on the property, which is the case for a lot of what we permit under this. We do a lot of wineries that don't meet the state definition of a winery, which I know is probably a topic that we're going to talk about later, but people are getting really creative with this. So I think some parameters around what a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use actually means would be helpful.
Right. Thank you. And let's see. Charles Jackson actually has our model code language in your rules as well. Did you want to offer some thoughts on that?
Well, and I wasn't necessarily prepared to compare it to what our code said, but I did find it interesting a component that we have a portion of it. We have the A and B, but in the B it says provide products and services essential to practice of agriculture, and then it goes and C, so which means you apply A or B and then C. In our code, we have it as or, so you can go A, B, or C, which is interesting, and we don't have the D, the sub what is that? The sub B there and C. So there, that's interesting. The other thing is, yeah, we get a lot of creativity. A lot of them are farmers that are trying to upscale their activities. A big one is weddings, which is kind of, and I think we recently had a LUA case on that. That I'm not prepared to talk about either, but so there is a lot of creativity that comes with these commercial activities, and a lot of them have been appealed and have court cases on them. So that's what I have to say.
Right, thank you. And then Matrice, I think Washington County has some of the case laws, the essential standard in it, but not the other aspects. Is that right?
Yeah, we don't have I think all of the model I haven't really compared, but it seems like we have a little bit of a our standard touches upon the building permit aspect of it a little bit, and identify some uses such as processing, drying, canning, things like that. And one thing I find interesting here is at Washington County, what we have regularly done is required the applicants to always have the farm use on the subject side. And the sense I'm getting is that's not necessarily what the case is. Because if somebody wants a tasting room, we insist they have a winery. Sorry, not a winery, a vineyard at a minimum, from which they're providing some to the tasting room. And of course, they're open to bring in from others too. But we sometimes get inquiries about, storage facilities or, especially for farm tractors. And a lot of people want to use this aspect of the commercial activity route to store farm tractors or other vehicles that they can kind of rent out to others. Or the other aspect also that we run into, I find it a little challenging to deal with sometimes. And I know we're not talking about farm stands here, but this spills over there too. But is that 25% of incidental income that we apply? So people sometimes kind of just use that. They'll probably set up a small tasting room or they'll propose a small farm stand. And then they'll just say that, yes, we're not going to exceed the 25%, but it's very, very hard for us to monitor or regulate that particular, other than just set a condition that you shall not exceed the 25%. So that's another thing. I was wondering I understand this is about codifying the case law, but it's just something I wanted to throw out there.
Yes, so we have also heard concerns related to farm stands and particularly documentation and ongoing compliance with the income standard for farm stands, but that is a separate topic, and we're really focusing on commercial activities in conjunction with farm use here today, and the sort of body of case law, which is quite large, that underlies that particular use, given the vagueness with which it was defined. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just adding on one of the other previous planners mentioned that things like processing as through grapes through a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use is something we also commonly see, or other fruits also that don't meet the winery requirements essentially, or a cidery. So yeah, that was it from me.
The processing of grapes is a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. And the legislature did explicitly state, so there's a provision in 215 that says wineries may be permitted as commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, and the alternative to being permitted under the winery statutes of 215, 452 or 453. All right, Ken, you had a comment in the chat, and then we'll go to Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, my comment was similar to what Matri was just getting at. I'm worried that this hooks in farm stands in a weird way, so I think it needs to explicitly carve that out or be more clear if we're talking about specific commercial uses or not. The other thing is I am a little bit concerned with this language under AC, significantly enhance the farming enterprises, the local agricultural community. If you just have a small commercial activity, how are you going to significantly enhance the farming enterprises? So I have a concern about the language. How are you going to show that? Let's say you're talking about all of Marion County. That's a lot of agriculture, or some other particular counties. And the last thing I just want to I have a question about how I want people to be thoughtful about how small farmers, small producers who are wanting to do like farm to table dinners or something of that nature, how that might get precluded by this, and thereby I think actually have the unintended consequence of potentially hurting some small produce farmers. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, so I would just, in response, Ken, just be clear that this is for commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, which is a standalone, sub 2 use under 215, 213, and 215, 283. So this doesn't impact the requirements for farm stands or agritourism and other commercial events, which are their own separate uses. So
sure, a lot of counties do farm to table dinners as commercial activities in conjunction with the farm use. And so that's what I have a concern about. And so do farm stands. And then the county will require them to do it as a separate commercial activity.
So that gets into something that we've talked a lot about in our technical working group, is like when should something be reviewed as an agritourism, other commercial event subject to those particular standards that were established by a legislature? When should something be reviewed as a farm stand, as a sub 1 use under the standards that were established by the legislature and clarified in our rules? And then when should be something reviewed as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, which is a different use that really doesn't have very many standards associated with it, certainly not none that have been established by the legislature or yet clarified in our rules. But again, there is a large body of case law that sort of defined those. So I want to be clear that what we're talking about, because there is a lot of confusion and conflation between those different types of uses, is that here we're just talking about the commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. So we want to make crystal clear that. Mike?
Yeah, this one really causes a lot of heartburn. And I think we probably ought to figure out a way to get planning departments more money and more planners, because this is just a nightmare. We should try to restrict this in as many ways as we can. One of the things I notice in our county, I've looked at them very closely, that every single one of our commercial uses in conjunction with on-site farm use are out of compliance. And that brings me to another question of enforcement, that it's wonderful us to nitpick the wording in the codes when in many cases they're all out of compliance and the counties aren't doing anything. Can't really blame them. They don't have a lot of money to do that. But that's a huge issue, and that goes to a comment Lauren Poor made earlier about agritourism and so forth. Some of it would be not so bad to farmers that are actually trying to grow food in the farm zone if they were in compliance with the 25 conditions that the counties very carefully put on them, but they often aren't. And I wish you could put that in the parking lot, Hillary, that the enforcement issue is 50% of the whole land use issue. And we could stay within the sideboards that are supposedly supposed to be put on things, we'd all be better off. But getting back to the real point here, I do believe this is the best wording that we can have for the process we're allowed to do at this time. So I would support this wording. I do have one question though, and I realize this is the wording that came out of the case law, but do we really mean farming rather than agriculture? And you have to study the definitions very carefully again and see whose definition you want to use. Going way back to my FFA days, the first thing we learned is that agriculture is more than farming, and only 34% of the agriculture is the farming itself. And I'm just wondering which one we really mean. And I guess we could carefully look at the definitions in the land use code, but I'm not sure there is one for agriculture. But that's my suggestion there. And anyway, this one is, as many of the planners have mentioned, this one has really had some very creative attempts to really get around the intent of protecting farming and the farmland. And I'm really not in favor of that. And anyway, I think that's all of my comments on that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Could you expand a little bit more on how you see the difference between a farming enterprise and an agricultural enterprise?
Well, as I suggested, I'd have to really carefully go through the definitions, see what the definitions are in the code. But I think in many cases, the practice of agriculture could be much larger. It might include processing, actually often, and some marketing organizations that market agricultural products are agriculture rather than farming. And I really think we mean farming here. I really think that's the intent here.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mike. And Samantha.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this section. And I'm coming at this section from not only my day-to-day practice as a land use attorney, but also I have a vineyard and winery and a tasting room permitted as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use in Jackson County. And so I'm looking at this from a dual perspective. And I think what I'm going to do is I am going to follow up in writing, because there's a lot here that I would like to articulate very clearly. So I will be following up in writing on this section. But I will just say at the outset, I do have a lot of concerns with this language. I think I am confused as how an applicant is going to successfully apply under this language, for a number of reasons, because I'm not sure how they're going to be able to put an application together showing that they meet a lot of the requirements of subsection AA compared to subsection C. I to what Ken was saying, a lot of this language is really squishy and difficult, particularly for a small business to be able to meet. To what Ken was saying, we oftentimes have agricultural operations that are multifaceted, and so parts of their operation are permitted in different ways. So they might have a farm stand, but they might also have a commercial activity in conjunction of farm use, which is a different permit. And they might also have agritourism, which is done in a different way. And so I think it oftentimes we write these looking at, the very creative examples that are of no nexus to agricultural at all, and we imperil those operations that are very much tied to agriculture. And that's I will follow up in writing because I have some concerns here with this language, because this does feel like it would be punitive to those farmers who are doing things that are $1 away from agriculture actually, and that they would have a very difficult time meeting these requirements. I will also say, from a stylistic standpoint, and as someone who represents a lot of people in the agricultural community and a lot of people who are of an older generation, I have concerns about the accessibility of this language for applicants. I will just say, in the words of the late Justice Scalia, his best advice to young lawyers was, don't write like a lawyer. And I'm afraid that we have just copy and pasted over legal language that is going to be very hard for people to apply with, and it's going to create a lot of barriers and some equity issues for people trying to do this without attorneys or trying to do this in a way that reduces risk of appeal.
All right, thank you, Samantha. So one of the suggestions I'm hearing embodied there is to simplify the language further to make it more understandable. And we'll look forward to some additional thoughts and comments from you on the topic. All right, Jim.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I think my first thought here is it's really important for everyone when they're looking at the case law, the court decisions, read the court decisions, because several of them have a very good discussion of the legislative intent on what a commercial use in conjunction with farm use was supposed to be. And when you read the legislative intent going clear back to the initial adoptions of the statute at the legislature, they were not contemplating this wide array of things. They were talking about things with that directly service agricultural operations, farming operations, such as farm implement dealers, such as fabrication places that make things for farmers and the like. So I think it's really important that everybody go back and look at the intent, the legislative intent of this first off. Second, speaking of the legislature, and this was pointed out earlier, the legislature specifically stated in only one or maybe another case that a use that is otherwise called out in the exclusive farm use zone may also be approved as a commercial use in conjunction with farm use. So conversely, I would argue that the legislature, because they didn't say that for other uses, does not mean that you can go and approve a farm stand as a commercial use in conjunction with farm use when farm stands are specifically called out. You could say the same thing about some of the agritourism events. They have their own venue to go and be considered for use or whatever. So the fact that the legislature did say wineries could go through that, but they didn't address that for other uses, is something to take into consideration here. And then, when push comes to shove, and I've talked to a lot of people over the years about what is a commercial use in conjunction with farm use, And I've dealt with everything from seed cleaning operations to milling operations. Processing is always an interesting one because, remember the legislature established a small scale processing process separately from using the commercial use in conjunction for larger ones. They tend to always swing around and focus on directly serving the agricultural community. So again, it comes right back to what is the legislative intent in terms of what is a commercial use in conjunction with farm use. I will say, excuse me, that I support the language that's here for now because it directly does relate to what the courts have said a commercial use in conjunction with farm use is, and those court decisions a lot of times does discuss the legislative intent. That's what I'll finish with, Hillary.
All right, thank you, Jim. And Mike, I'm sorry, I skipped over you, and then we'll go to Rory and then Blair.
I'm sorry, Hillary, I did not lower my hand, so
Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
All right,
else.
Rory and then Blair.
Yeah, thanks. I also generally like this language after having read through a lot of the case law on it, both recently in the cases you cited, Hillary, but then having been involved on a couple commercial activity in conjunction with farm use applications in the past. And I think this pretty well captures some of that legislative intent that Jim just talked about. The one thing I wanted to call out as an issue and perhaps raise the idea of defining a little further is what is the local agricultural community? And I'll use an example for why I'm calling that out. I was involved on an application where the applicant proposed defining the local agricultural community as any of the 36 counties of Oregon or a neighboring state, which, Washington, Idaho, and California, right? If we were going to allow calling Imperial County, California, the local agricultural community, clearly that's not in line with the legislative intent here. So we actually in that one, came together and came up with a bit of a compromise that was, the county where the use would be cited or an adjacent county. And then again, it was a compromise, settlement and conditions of approval. We picked a couple others that they wanted, So maybe there is some sort of middle ground along those lines of the county or a number of adjacent counties or something like that to get a better handle on what's the local agricultural community.
All right, thank you, Rory. So suggesting maybe a little bit of pencil sharpening on little a, big C, and what exactly we're talking about when we're talking about the operations that are being served or enhanced by the commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. Blair.
Hey, wrong button. Thank you. So I agree with this. I've read all these cases that you cited, and I think you did sort of a remarkable job of getting down all that language. Of course, lawyers are on courts and they're on LUBA. So it was lawyers who wrote this stuff, and we're picking it up and putting it in the rule. So that may not be optimal for the average person, and I understand that, but that's what it says for now. I do think, just as with the other standards, when we can find some clear and objective help to help applicants, to help counties, to help neighbors who are concerned about the new use, it's a good thing. So I'm one of the people who submitted language ahead of the meeting that y'all will get after the meeting. And I'm going to tell you the two things that we did on this. And I don't know if my language is spot on, but it may start getting at some of the concerns about clarity and can we sort of get a sense of what's happening. So one thing to do is to say what these commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, CACFUs, are not, and the kind of applications that we see a lot. And I think that would include overnight lodging. Somebody mentioned events. Events go with agritourism, not with CACFUs, or any establishment serving food or alcohol, because there's other ways to do that. So I don't think that's what CACFUs are about. There's other provisions of the law that address those uses, those non-farm uses. And secondly, and related, would be to have a provision that said The provisions of this rule authorizing commercial activities in conjunction with farm use may not be used to authorize cideries, breweries, farm stands, or other uses authorized specifically by other provisions of this division. So just say it, and yet you're in the wrong lane. So this was a lot talked about in the working group, and I think, and Hillary has mentioned it, is this sort of multi-path option that's so confusing for applicants and for counties and for neighbors to go, whoa, like, are we even in the right domain? So I think you could just, it's not codification, it's adding something extra, and this group may not want to do this, but I think it's not difficult and could add some clarity. So thank you.
Thank you, Blair. And that's something that was identified by the technical working group as a possible action to undertake in the future, which would be, just the last part of what Blair was saying would be a clarification that uses that are otherwise listed in Chapter 215 cannot alternatively be reviewed as commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. So that is something that we are considering as a sort of separate rulemaking charge, and that we may ask LCDC to consider in April at the LCDC meeting, just so folks are aware of that. All right, Mickey.
So am I right that every county has the right to make their planning more restrictive than the state guidelines and rules?
So
that
for some,
the state is the minimum that they have to reach. I mean, I was listening to everybody and I'm thinking, well, if some of this is your area, then maybe your planning department and planning commission and commissioners need to look at how to make it clearer and more exact in your county. Just a thought.
Yeah, thank you, Mickey. That's a really good question. So, I do want to be clear that, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use are, what are called a sub-2 use. And, it's long been held that sub-2 uses, counties can be more restrictive than state standards, but not less restrictive. And some counties may choose not to offer sub-2 uses in their codes. So the counties we have represented here today, about half of them have, well, actually, more than that. 4 of them have more restrictive standards than what is currently in state law in their codes. And then I believe 2 of them do not. I believe Lynn and Umatilla both have this sort of statutory language in their codes. So you're absolutely right. Counties can be more restrictive than what's in statute and rule, and many counties in the state have chosen to do that with commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. And again, what we're doing here is trying to standardize some of that across the state by codifying this guidance from the courts on what a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use is. So very good point. Thank you, Mickey. All right, Rob.
I too think you did a remarkable job getting most of the case law in here. I did want to point out that we had an argument one time with our county over the incidental in small c activities that are incidental and subordinate, and we did get some case law on that out of the Court of Appeals. Actually, I'll follow up with what it says in writing, but I just wanted to point out that what's there now still can lead to arguments, I think. And the guidance from the Court of Appeals on that wasn't clear and objective, of course, never is, but at least it does give some additional guidance on what is or is not incidental and subordinate.
Great, thank you, Rob. So what I'm reading here in your comment is that for sub C here, any associated events or activities must be incidental to the commercial activity. That comes from one of the cases. That maybe we could consider expanding the term incidental a little bit at our
some additional language to explain
Okay.
it more fully. Yes.
At our next meeting, we will be talking about the incidental and subordinate clarifications that came out of the D. Benedetti case.
That's
But
the one I'm referring to. Yeah.
okay. That's specific to agritourism and other commercial events. But we're definitely going to be talking about that. Looking forward to that discussion as well. And I have to say that a lot of the credit for writing this language goes to Catherine Daniels, not me. Catherine, did you want to say anything about as the process for crafting our model code language? Or I'm not sure if that's relevant to this discussion, but I just wanted to acknowledge that you did that initial work in 2015.
Well, I just worked off of case law, and
Yeah.
as you did, and maybe that's why I like what you've written. Looks really good. Yeah, and I would add to what Rob just said. If there's case law on that could further define incidental, great, super. But also, I'm a fan of the idea of adding, as Blair suggested, a list of exclusions, which would be primarily uses that would draw potentially a large number of people into agricultural areas, and those Blair's provided a list to you of those uses.
Okay. Thank you, and we'll circulate that along with the meeting notes. Right, Lauren.
Yeah, I don't want to create more work, but so we can kind of see how this would work in practice. Could you also provide a list of activities that would meet this test?
That's good, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts for maybe for some of the planners that we haven't heard from on this test so far? Yeah. So Alyssa, do you have any thoughts on this, or how Lynn treats commercial activities in conjunction with farm use? Or if that's a use that you guys get very often?
Yeah, so you mentioned that in our code, it has kind of the statutory language, which is true. We have a definition of a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use that goes into a little bit more detail that kind of is similar to some of the language that's on there in the proposed rule language. Because our definition says it's any commercial activity provides products, services, particularly processing, that are essential to agricultural practice in the region. And then we also have a definition of commercial agriculture that kind of speaks more to the essential part. So we do quite a few commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. Since Lynn County happens to be the grass seed capital of the world, we see a lot of grass seed storage operations. We've done hemp processing. I think what else? I think we've done maybe a distillery. We've done small wineries and commercial activities that don't meet the winery threshold. So fairly common, but usually nothing that would kind of challenge these particular proposed language, because it's definitely usually very much.
Right. Any other thoughts from planners on the proposed language, or challenges that might come along with the proposed language? I think most of the counties actually have somewhat similar language already in your codes to this.
Hillary, before you move on, I just wanted to build up what Alyssa said. Alyssa, there was a case in your county, and I would suggest that people may want to take a look at it. It was Gilmore versus Lynn County, and the guy was compressing straw bales, and the argument was whether it was a farm use or it was a commercial use in conjunction with farm use. I think that would be a really interesting one for people to take a look at also, because it just is a good discussion of farm use standing alone and what is related to farm use versus what is a commercial use in conjunction with farm use. I just wanted to throw that out there. It was a very, very interesting case.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting one. And we initially permitted that as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, because he was doing hay compaction and he was compacting for himself and for other folks. And so it was kind of beyond that 25% threshold. So we permitted as that. He applied for code interpretation, and our planning director at the time said it's not commercial activity. He's processing because he's not, or he's preparation, he's preparing. It's not changing the form of it other than compacting it smaller than it already was. And that got overturned at the county commissioners, and then LUBA actually sided with the applicant that yes, it was preparation versus processing. Very interesting. Causes code enforcement issues to this day.
So that's what I just wanted to add, since you brought Gilmore processing preparation conversation up, that is also something else that we will likely be recommending that the commission look to add to our charge, is looking at definition of preparation. I'm sorry, repairing the definition of preparation and looking at a definition of processing. So the Gilmore case would be something that we may be looking at in the future. All right. And Amber, do you want to add some thoughts on commercial activities in conjunction with farm use in Lane County?
Thanks, Hillary. I don't have much to add. We do have the model code language adopted in our code. I just give a general comment that I think that works pretty well, in as much as I recall having to look up case law during processing and application in the past. So I think it's helpful to have in the code. I don't have any particular thoughts. They're not all that common here in Lane County. I was looking through our files, and we have not very many that we process annually.
All right, thank you. And Charles, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just quickly brought it down regarding processing. I mean, down here we have a lot of marijuana processing and hemp processing. So that and psilocybin, of course, is another, the newest one that has unusual impacts that I guess we'll be talking about in the future. But so I was just thinking about those as other things that are uses that are happening down here that are pretty substantial. That's it.
All right, thank you, Charles. So before, it looks like nobody else has their hands up on this topic. So I've heard a lot of support for the language as it's been proposed. We've heard that maybe there are a couple of areas where the language could be tightened up in further defining local agricultural community or in incidental. I think we heard some concerns from Ken about the word significantly being added in the language here. And we'll look for some additional comments from Samantha on this language proposal. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to add before we sort of wrap up the conversation about commercial activities? No? Okay. So that would mean we would actually be ending early, which is a surprise. Then if nobody has any further comments on the commercial activity in conjunction with farm use language. I'm trying to think if we should revisit the let's not do that. Let's wrap up early. So let's go into next steps. So between these meetings, I'm encouraging folks to go ahead and submit written comments to me. When I send out the meeting minutes, that will include, a summary of the conversation today, as well as materials that have been received from others, providing rule tweaks or whatever. Feel free to respond to me directly with additional thoughts on those. Like we have a lot of ground to cover in these meetings, and having feedback between the meetings, I think, helps keep the process moving forward. But again, send comments, thoughts to me directly so that we don't run afoul of public meeting laws. And if you want to communicate thoughts or comments just to me alone, just indicate that when you submit them to me. As far as next steps coming up, I'm going to get those meeting minutes out within the next couple of days. If you have further comments or ideas that come up for you, please get those to me by April 3rd. That way I can include them in the packages that go out for our April 22nd meeting. Our packages go out 2 weeks in advance so that you have lots of time to consider the materials. Again, our next meeting is going to be on April 22nd at 9 a.m. And at the April 22nd meeting, we'll be talking about the agritourism and other commercial events, incidental and subordinate standard, and the necessary to support standard that's applied to 18 events per year. And we'll also be talking about the application of the farm impacts test to transportation improvements on rural lands when they are on resource lands at that meeting. So we'll have, again, packets out 2 weeks in advance of that meeting. Jeff, did you have one other comment or question about the schedule?
Jeff, you're on mute.
Just wanted to organizing and conducting a meeting in which everyone got heard and in which we got through everything efficiently.
Thank you. And again, I'm surprised we wrapped up this topic so quickly. But I guess we'll look forward to additional comments maybe submitted in between the meetings. So thank you all very much for your volunteering your time to serve on this RAC. Yeah, I recognize that this is a volunteer activity for many of you, and you're taking time out of your schedules to devote to this effort. I really appreciate that. We recognize that you're very busy, and I hope that we'll be efficient with your time. So I'm happy to give you all another 20 minutes back in your day with this. But again, if any questions come up, please don't hesitate